Hey everyone, Percy Jules here. A little while ago I did a video on insert effects and send effects, so what they are, how they work, what the differences are, things like that. Now, apparently, as a result of that, some more questions arose. So, for instance, Anand Ram, hope I pronounce it correctly, says, okay, but you didn't say why you use one over the other. And also Mario Duenas says, my problem with all these videos explaining this is you guys don't explain what happens when we send compression to the send effects and reverb to the insert. Why is that the right way to do it? You don't explain. And also Adrian Mutimer touches on this issue. So basically, the predominant question here is, so when exactly do you use insert effects? When do you use the send effects? And why? Well, I actually touched on this a little bit in my previous video, apparently not enough, so that's why I decided to do this video, just to try to clarify this a little bit as much as I can anyway. So let's get into it. Okay, so the first thing I want to say about that is, and I think I also mentioned this as a response to one of the comments, is that I believe that in music production there is no right and wrong, really. I wouldn't think of it in terms of right and wrong, it's more about preferences. So it's not about, okay, I have this track, I have to apply some compression to it, it is a compressor, so therefore it has to be an insert effect. No. I would actually approach it from the other side. So I would say, okay, what is it that I'm actually trying to achieve here? What sound am I looking for? And once you've established that, then take a look at all the tools at your disposal and all the ways you could apply those tools. And good to know is that there are no rules. There are no laws about how to apply an EQ or how to apply a reverb. Whatever it takes to get you closer to where you want to be. I guess that's the only rule there is. Now, how do you know then what effect to choose from and how to apply it, either as an insert effect or as a send effect? Well, that takes a little bit of experience, it takes a little bit of creativity sometimes, but it also takes a lot of common sense. Now, having said that, let's take a look at a visual presentation of the signal flow of insert effects and send effects. Okay, now first let's take a look at insert effects. Now, there is a sound source that passes through a track. The output of the track is sent to the master. But before it hits the master, it is being affected by what we call an insert effect. So it's kind of the entire signal, very important to mention, the entire signal is kind of being filtered through this effect. So when it leaves this effect, it is now a different signal and then it goes to the master. Send effects, the output is sent straight to the master, but somewhere along the way a copy is being made of that signal. That copy is being affected by a plugin or of some kind. The result of that is being joined back together with the original signal, thereby creating a certain effect, and then it goes to the master. Now, if you keep this in mind and think about it a little bit, this will answer probably most of the questions you may have about insert effects and send effects and which one to choose. But to clarify a little bit more, let's get into some practical examples where common sense might help you out when it comes to deciding on either an insert effect or a send effect. Now, as I mentioned, there are no rules. However, there are some things that in some situations make more sense and other things that make less sense, depending on what it is you're trying to achieve, obviously. So for instance, let's say that we have a vocal track and we want to apply some EQ to those vocals. Let's say that we want to cut away everything below 100 Hertz, which is actually a pretty common thing to do. Why? Because usually, very important word here, usually the most relevant frequencies on vocals can be found in the mid-range and higher frequencies. Everything below 100 Hz or somewhere in that area is usually considered rumble. It's not really relevant, and it wouldn't even make that much of a difference to the human ear if they're there or not. Okay? And in that case, it's better than to remove them. Why? Because by removing them, you actually free up some space sonically for other instruments to be there. So some bass sounds, some drum sounds, they all live in those lower frequencies. And by cutting away the lower frequencies on the vocals, you actually achieve a lot more clarity in your mix. Okay? Now, let's say that that is our objective. Okay? Then, looking at the signal flow once more, then ask yourself, would it, in this case, make a lot of sense to use an EQ as a send effect? The answer is obviously no. Why? Because you make a copy of the signal, of the original signal, and yes, from that copy, you cut away everything below 100 Hz. But everything below 100 Hz on the original signal still remains. So it just doesn't make a lot of sense to do it like this. It makes a lot of sense to use an EQ as an insert effect in this case. Does that mean that you should never, ever use an EQ as a send effect? No, it doesn't mean that. To be honest, I couldn't think of any practical example right now why it would make sense to do so, but you just might run into a situation where it would make sense to use an EQ as a send effect, so never rule that out. It just depends on what you're trying to achieve, okay? But for most cases, in this case and in most cases, it makes a lot of sense to use an EQ as an insert effect. Now, Mario Duenas talked about compressing. So, when do people use compressors? Well, in most cases, people use compressors to level out the volume width on any track. So, for instance, vocals. Well, every vocalist knows that it's near impossible to sing at a constant volume level. It's impossible. So, when you record vocals, what you're left with is a vocal track with quieter parts and with louder parts. And we use a compressor to usually bring up the overall volume and then to get rid of the extreme volume peaks and thereby leveling out the volume on that track. Now let's say that that is our objective. Okay? Now look at the signal flow once more and ask yourself, does it make a lot of sense to use a compressor in this situation as a send effect? I have to admit, in this situation, it is a bit more tricky, but still I would say no. It would make a lot more sense to use a compressor as an insert effect, because we're looking to affect the entire signal flow, and the only thing we want to do is level out the volume. We don't want to add anything to the sound, we just want to level the volume. So I would say insert effect. Does that mean that you should never, ever use a compressor as a send effect? Absolutely not. In fact, using a compressor as a send effect is a very common technique, usually referred to as parallel compression. Now, parallel compression is typically used, especially for drum sounds, to give it a little bit more punch. Very common technique. So again, ask yourself, what is it you're trying to achieve, and then make a decision, insert effect or send effect. Now, Mario also talked about reverb, and why is it that we always use reverb as a send effect. And also Adrian Mutimer talked about, basically said, okay, why bother using a send effect at all? So I have to say there is something to say for using, for instance, a reverb as an insert effect. You can definitely do it. However, there are some reasons sometimes why you would choose to use it as a send effect over using it as an insert effect. So first of all, there are some practical reasons to do so. So let's take a look at this example right here. Here I have 10 tracks, drum tracks, and I want to apply the exact same reverb to all the different tracks. Now, I can use the reverb as an insert effect. I can just bring in this reverb as an insert effect, make some changes to the settings, and then I would have to do so on all the different tracks. I would have to repeat this 9 times. Well, here already you can see that it might not be the most practical way to go about doing this, okay? And especially, let's say that at a future moment, at a later moment, I would want to make some more changes to the settings of this reverb. Again, I would have to do so on all the different tracks. Not practical at all. So let me remove this for now. And now again, let me bring in this reverb, but now as a send effect, okay? Now make sure that you send all these tracks to this effects track. And now if I want to make changes to the reverb, I would only have to do so once. Much more practical. Now another practical reason would be CPU power. So if you set up this reverb 10 times on 10 different tracks, that will put a lot more pressure on your CPU than when you use it as a single send effect. You know, that will be much lighter on your CPU, okay? So apart from all those practical reasons, there are also some more musical reasons why you would choose a send effect over an insert effect. So let's look at this example. Again, I have a vocal track, and this time I've set up a reverb as a send effect, okay? Now, actually one good reason to do this would be this. When you set it up like this, the original signal will stay clean. Whenever you set up an insert effect, the original signal will always pass some kind of plugin and thereby get affected. You know, and even if it's just the slightest bit, it will get affected. And this way, it will stay as clean as possible. That's a good thing, you know, and that might be a reason in and of itself to use a send effect over using an insert effect, okay? But there is another very, very, very good reason why you would choose a send effect over an insert effect. And that is this. Let's say that I really like this reverb, but I want to tweak it a little bit more. Okay? Now most reverb plugins have a lot of settings you can play around with. But let's say that we want to do something more. We want to do something beyond the possibilities of this plugin itself. Let's say that we want to play around with some frequencies. We want to boost some frequencies. We want to cut some frequencies. I'm thinking EQ. Okay? Now what we can do now is we can bring in an EQ and bring it in on this effects track. Okay? We can tweak it any way we want to, and this EQ will only affect this reverb. This is something you cannot do when you use a reverb as an insert effect. You can only do it when you use it as a send effect. Okay? And as you can imagine, the possibilities are infinite. Let's say that I want to have it go through some kind of filter. I would just bring in a filter. Let's say I want to have some weird phase effect. I can search for any effect and add it to this track. So again, you know, you have infinitely more control over this effect when you use it as a send effect. You know, very, very good reason why you would choose a send effect over an insert effect. So, yeah, I think I'm going to leave it at that for now. I hope this helps. I hope this clarifies a few things. If not, feel free to ask anything and I will do my best to answer to the best of my abilities. If you have any tips for me or anyone else, leave a comment. We can always learn from each other. So, you know, that's it. Thanks for watching and I will talk to you soon.